Hey, this is Josh Green with Alchemy Design and Development and Traverse Capital. In this episode, I wanted to talk about due diligence. And if you've ever bought a home, part of your contract, there's a due diligence timeline, a due diligence period. And that's the time that you and the seller agree to a timeline to give you enough time to do, things like a title report, to have a home inspector come through, to do your own inspection, and make sure that you want to go through with the purchase of the house, right? And that there aren't any other issues or anything that need to be addressed. And a development project is a lot the same. That we have for all of our development projects, we have a due diligence checklist that we go through. And what we're trying to do is just see if we're missing anything, right? And see if there are any issues that didn't come up when we first started looking at the property. And if there are, how we address them, and if any of those are, deal breakers, if any of those are bad enough that we, need to walk away from the property. And most times if we find anything, there are things that we can work through with the seller and keep moving forward. But so what we have on our due diligence checklist is, we do this on every property that we go under contract on. Is we do a title report, we do a survey, we dig into zoning and really understand. And some of these things we do before we actually go under contract, right? It's things that we do before deciding that we want to make an offer on a property. But certainly during due diligence, we would dig deeper into zoning, make sure we understand what we can and can't do. We would look at a plat map, which is, the recorded document with the county that shows the property, right? The description of the property on a map. We would also look at flood maps. We'd order a geotech report, a phase 1 environmental report. We would do a concept plan, and this is another thing that might fall into before we go under contract. We do a concept plan on what we think we can fit on the property. And we'd also do a pro forma, our own pro forma. And then we also, especially where we're doing townhomes for rent, we just check our pro forma with other management companies and have them do pro formas for us so we can see how we stack up, if we're totally off base or if we're within market. And so I kind of just want to talk through, each of these things a little bit and how they specifically pertain to this project on 21st Street. So the first thing is a title report, and your title company will probably do this for you for free. We work a lot with Cottonwood Title, and they are awesome. We have great relationships there with Krista Allred. She's amazing. And so in a title report, you're basically just looking for, are there any title issues? Is the seller, do they have authority to be able to sell you this property? Is there anything on the title that would cloud the title? Things that you would need to clear up at closing. If there's any past due property taxes, if there's any liens on the property. Another thing that we're looking for, loans would be another thing. If there's a loan on the property that we didn't know about, because those things will all need to be cleared up before we can take title to the property, right? Before we can close on it. And other things to look for are easements, especially, understanding who else has access to your property. And a lot of times those are utility companies that have access for their utility lines, whether it's electricity or gas. And so we want to understand where those easements are, because we can't, most times you can't build anything on top of those type of easements. And so that helps us refine our concept plan, right? And what we can actually fit. So another part of that is we always order a survey, and, we hire a surveyor to come out, survey the property. Sometimes there's discrepancies between, what's shown on the plat map, which is recorded with the county, and the actual dimensions of the property and the legal description. And so we always order a survey, just to have someone there on site, tell us exactly what the boundaries are, what the dimensions are. They'll if you give them a title report, they can then plot all those easements and any other weird things like that on the property, so you can see visually where they are. And a lot of times, if you're working with a lender or sometimes even investors, they'll want to see these things anyway. And so it's kind of kills two birds with one stone. We're doing our due diligence, understanding the property better, but it's also going to, down the road, it's going to check a box when we go to get a loan. They're going to want to be able to check these boxes, and they're doing their own due diligence before making a loan or investing in your property, right? Trying to understand what risks there are, the same way that we do as the developer. Zoning is another one, and this is something that we go into quite a bit before we even decide to make an offer on a property. Generally, we like to work within the existing zoning. There's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of value to be added if you go through a rezone process, take a property from a lower density zone to a higher density zone, or from agricultural to commercial or something. You can add a lot of value to a property that way. But it also takes time, right? And for us, we generally try to work within the existing zoning. And so, before we even went under contract on this property, that's how we identified it as a property that we were interested in. We knew it was a downtown CBD zone. We knew that we could do pretty much anything we wanted. As far as density, there was no limit on density. We're not maxing out density on this project, and we can talk about that another time. But really understanding things like setbacks, how far your buildings have to be off the property line, the spacing between buildings, how many parking stalls, all of these things really, dictate what you can build on the property and help you refine your concept plan and your pro forma, right? To make sure that it's still a deal. And so we do a lot of that zoning work ahead of time before we even go under contract. But certainly while we're in due diligence, we're still talking with the city. We're checking our concept plans with the city, getting their feedback from, not only zoning, but also, engineering and fire and other departments, getting their feedback on the concept plan to make sure there's nothing that we're missing there or nothing that would keep us from building what we want to do. We talked about plat maps a little bit already. In most places around here, well, in every county here, you can get plat maps, right? And sometimes you have to go into the county recorder's office and request and maybe pay a small fee for a copy of one. But a lot of counties have online GIS maps, and you can download images for free of the actual plot map with the dimensions, and so that's one of the first things that we do. It's really easy to get. It's free, right? You can or very low cost, and a lot of this stuff is right. Like digging into zoning, you can do that yourself, or you can call the planner. That there's little cost there unless you get maybe an architect or a civil engineer involved in that. Title report too. That should be a free or very low cost due diligence item. Flood maps. I mean, this is another free one, right? But you want to understand, if your property's in a flood zone, because that will impact, potentially where you can build, where you can and can't build on the property. But it could also impact your ongoing operating costs if you have to pay for flood insurance, right? So if you're in certain flood zones, you're going to have to get flood insurance, which makes your insurance premium go up, makes your expenses go up, your NOI go down because of that, right? And so you want to understand all those things. And that's available for free as well, right? You can go to the FEMA Flood Maps website, you can type in your address, you can see really quickly if you're in a flood zone or not. Wetlands is another thing, and didn't apply to our project on 21st Street. There were no issues, I guess, as we're going down this list. There were no really issues with any of these items so far. As we went through the due diligence process on this specific project, there were no title issues. There was clear title from the seller. There was nothing weird, on that side. We got a survey. We already understood zoning really well, but we also had conversations with the city during the process. We had a copy of the plat map, we had a copy of the flood map, and no issues anywhere there. And when I want to bring John Galbraith, my partner and architect, on to talk more specifically about design and about the zoning and some of the kind of quirks and things that we had to work through on the zoning. But just high level, as far as just due diligence, do we want to move forward with this deal or not? So far there hasn't been anything that has kept us from moving forward, right? So wetlands. This is another one where, not on this deal, but on another deal, not finding out beforehand that there were wetlands on the property, we lost a good chunk of money on another deal because it just wasn't part of our checklist at the time. And so that's something that we missed. And, unfortunately found out after we'd already spent, tens of thousands of dollars on this project, that we weren't going to be able to build on it. We weren't going to be able to do what we wanted to do. And so we had to walk away from that one and lose some money, just because that wasn't a piece of our due diligence, right? On 21st Street, it's downtown Ogden. You can kind of visually tell a lot of times if there's maybe wetlands on a property by, if you're seeing, standing water or cattails or, maybe even birds, ducks or something. You might want to dig into that a little bit more, but this is an urban site. Everything around it has been developed, and so there were no wetlands issues there, luckily. The next thing is a geotech report, and what this is it's basically, or a soils report, it's sometimes called. And so what we're doing here is we're paying someone to come in, drill a bunch of test holes. They drill a core, in several spots of your property. They bring their drill in and they drill it out, take samples, send them off to the lab. And what they're trying to do is, or what we're trying to do by ordering that report and that work done, is we're trying to understand the soils. And, this is not my area of expertise, but the high level view is we're trying to understand if we can build on this property or not, right? If the soil will support these, in this case, these townhomes that we want to build on the property. And so a geotech report or a soils report will give you that information. They'll take the samples from all over the site, send them off to the lab. They'll send you a report that basically says, okay, here's what types of soil are here. Here's where the groundwater is. That's another issue that could come up. And as part of that report, they'll make recommendations about, okay, this is, maybe you need to over X. You need to dig out more of this dirt and fill it in with, engineered fill that won't compact. But they'll give you recommendations on what needs to be done. And luckily on this site, there were no issues. Just nothing out of the ordinary that would keep us from building on this site. We didn't have to do, piers or anything crazy like that to support the buildings that we had proposed. So the next one is a phase 1 environmental report. So the way these works is, a phase 1 report is really just kind of a historical search. They're kind of looking back in time to see if there were any previous buildings or uses of the property that could be potential for environmental contamination. So common ones are like an old gas station with a buried gas tank, dry cleaners, even some agricultural uses. Some of the chemicals they use could be contaminants. So there's a lot of things, and that can get really expensive if you have that type of environmental contamination on your property. It can be expensive to remediate. And so again, just trying to understand our risks in the property and what the consequences of those are. That's part of it, is understanding, are there any contaminants that we have to deal with? Do we have to remediate? Do we have to, dig out or in some other way remediate? If we have to, cap the site or have to put in a vapor barrier or something to keep, these chemicals from going up into these units. And nothing came back on the phase one, luckily. And so there were no issues there. If something does come back on a phase one, you can then go to the next step, which is order a phase two environmental report, where they go a little bit deeper into investigating, what's actually there, and they may at that point even start, disturbing the site, or digging some holes, or things like that. But a phase one is really, more than anything, it's just a historical search. And part of that is they look through records to see if any uses have been gas stations or something like that. They also will use satellite imagery and aerial imagery, and they'll go back in time to see what was on the property in the past, and they'll kind of try to identify potential issues that way as well. And so on our 21st Street project, no major issues. Or no issues, really, nothing that would keep us from building this residential use, these townhomes on the property. We talked about concept plan a little bit. So this is something that that John and I do early on is, we'll identify a property that we like in a market that we like, that has good dynamics of, we really look for population and employment growth more than anything. And then, we try to drill into, okay, what's the competition, and how can we compete in this market, or how can we best compete in this market, right? And so part of that is a concept plan that John puts together, and he'll go through the zoning. He'll take a lot of this due diligence information, the survey, the plat, and he'll use that as kind of his canvas. And that, along with the zoning, to really figure out what will fit on the property. And one of the things I love about working with John is that we do this early on, and it's a pretty collaborative, because he's working on the design side at the same time I'm working on the finance side and the underwriting side. And it's really helpful to have an architect involved that early on, that you can bounce ideas off of, and kind of play with the pro forma in real time, kind of try to figure out the best use of the site. So yeah, I mean, John's original concept plan was for 24 units. They all had attached 2-car garages. And when I talked to John, we'll talk about how some of those things have changed a little bit from the original concept plan to meet the zoning requirements. But that's something we do very early on, even before we go, under contract or make an offer, as we want to understand roughly, kind of what will fit. And John talks a lot about Lego bricks, right? And so at this stage, he's really just putting, with townhomes, really just kind of rectangles on the site, and seeing what will fit. And then pro forma, I mentioned, this is something also we do right from the very start. We'll have an idea after, kind of doing our market research and seeing what else is around, that would be a competitor, and really just trying to identify, gaps in the market and in the supply. And part of that is looking at rents and expenses and all of these other things, right? To put together a pro forma of, okay, here's our net operating income, and how can we maximize that? And what unit mix and sizes can maximize the NOI for us, which, if you maximize your NOI, you're going to maximize the value of the property. And so the interesting thing about Ogden is, there are a lot of apartments there, and there are actually a lot of townhomes for rent there. And even being downtown, downtown Ogden, in, the middle of, kind of the urban area of Ogden, you don't see a lot of really any apartments with structured parking. And so if we were trying to maximize density, that would have been the easy way to do that, right? Is to build an apartment building with structured parking, go 5 stories over the parking garage, and that's how you maximize density, right? And this is something I can talk more when I talk to John about, because he's really passionate about, just because you can build 100 units on the site doesn't mean that that's the best that's not necessarily the highest and best use of that site, right? And that was the case here too. There's no density really limit at all, and it really, in this zone and in a lot of municipalities, it comes down to parking. And can you fit enough parking for the number of units and the size of the units that you're proposing? And we'll talk more about parking and the challenges there when I talk with John. But so we do a pro forma right from the very start. Just a high level pro forma. Okay, here's roughly what we think we can fit on the site. Here's roughly what the rents look like for that type of unit, expenses. Here's what our NOI is. We do a rough idea of costs, like what does it cost to build this. And if it looks like there's, a difference in value and cost, if the value is higher than the cost to build it, then it's worth looking at a little bit more, right? And digging into a little bit more. But like I mentioned earlier, we don't just, my background is in appraisal and consulting and underwriting, and I feel comfortable in that role. But even then, we don't just use our numbers. We want to gut check our numbers and our assumptions with property managers, right? Because we, at the end of the day, we don't manage our own properties, and it's not something that we want to expand into. And so, at the end of the day, we're going to have to hire a management company, and so we want to get their feedback on it too. And a lot of times we will, we'll send them the renderings, we'll send them the location, the floor plans, and get their feedback on all those things, on the layout. Like, is this what tenants are looking for? Does this size seem right for the market and for the comps that are there? And so we did that with this project too. We sent it out to 3 different management companies, all companies that I've had experience with, I've worked with in the past. Any one of them would be a great partner, management partner on this project. But they all came back shockingly close. They all came in really close to our rents. Expenses were pretty much, on par. And it was a really tight range. Our pro forma ended up being, kind of right in the middle of these other 3 that we got from management companies. And so, as we go out to lenders and investors, and we're, pitching them on this project, that's a helpful tool to have in your bag, to say, okay, here's our underwriting, but we double checked it with these 3 other groups. Like, look how tight the range is. We're right in the middle. We think we can actually do better than this, but we're going to underwrite it as right in the middle. And anyway, that's something we do on every project from the very beginning. And then as we work through this process and work through the plan and refining the plan, we're working on refining our pro forma at the same time. Another thing I didn't mention is, as part of the, kind of the standard contract here, there's a seller disclosure. And so we always ask for the seller's disclosure, which is basically, tell us everything you know about this property. And there's a form, there's a Utah State form that we can send them and have them fill out and send back to us. And in both cases, if you remember, there were 2 different owners, and both of those seller disclosures came back, with really no issues, right? Like, we don't know of anything that's going on here. The one thing that did come up is one of the owners told me that he had buried some concrete slabs. He had them sitting on the site for a long time, and the city wanted him to move them. They didn't want them sitting there, and he just threw some dirt over them. So we knew that it would have been a surprise if we hadn't asked, and we got started, excavating and clearing the site to find those there. It wouldn't have been the end of the world, but that was something that came up in our due diligence through the seller disclosure. As he said, hey, I've got these concrete slabs here, they're at the back of the property. I just threw some dirt on them, they're there. And so, seller disclosures are also a very important part of this. And that's pretty much it as far as our due diligence checklist. From here, you spend a little bit of money here, for some of these things, like a survey, for a geotech, for a phase 1. If you're not lucky enough to have a partner that's an architect, you're paying a civil engineer or an architect to do some of these concept plans for you. If you're not an underwriter, maybe you're bringing someone on as a consultant to help you underwrite the property or do a market study, which is another thing that we didn't talk about, but that's part of due diligence as well, is just understanding the market. What in our case, what comparable townhomes are renting for. How full are they? Are they able to lease up at those rents? Are they charging for anything on top of rent? That all comes up in our market analysis, which is also part of our due diligence. And it's something that we refine as we go through the process, right? Even once we're under construction, we've closed the funding, we're under construction, market analysis is still an important part of this whole process, right? We're updating our comps, and as we build through the property, leading up to lease up, and then at lease up, we're reassessing, okay, what's changed? Can we rent these for more, for less? Do we need to offer concessions at this point? So market analysis, it's part of due diligence, but it's really an ongoing process throughout the development and, even into operations and stabilization. It's just a never-ending piece of development and operations. And so I hope that's helpful. It gives you an idea of, kind of some of the things that we look for as we're looking at a deal and deciding whether or not to go forward with it. And like I said, in this case of our 21st Street project, luckily nothing came up that was, a real issue or a deal breaker. They were all pretty common things, with utility easements, nothing crazy on the geotech. There was no really boundary discrepancies, anything like that. And so luckily this was a pretty easy one as far as due diligence goes. We just kind of went through the list, checked our boxes, and just kept moving. So I hope that's helpful. I think on the next episode, I want to start talking to John Galbraith, my partner, our architect, kind of about kind of conceptual design and working through zoning and those requirements, and parking specifically was one that was a bit of a challenge on this project. I want to talk to him and have him talk about his process behind designing this property, even down to exterior materials and the look of the property. Could also try to get our civil engineer to talk to me about how they laid out the utilities and the buildings on the site. How we on this site we have to retain stormwater, so how do you do that underground? And so that might be another good conversation. But I hope this is helpful to you, and it's fun for me to be able to talk about this project. I'm super excited about it. At this point in time, as of today, things are looking really good as far as financing and moving forward. And so really excited to keep sharing more about this project and kind of some of our thought process and our systems in getting one of these over the line. So I'll talk to you next time.